Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depends on which part of the world you're actually tuning in from. Welcome to another episode of Navigating the World's Maritime Ecosystems, a podcast series with me, Punit Oza, and a Capital Link shipping podcast. In this series, as you know, we are trying to cover ecosystems and an understanding of what's actually happening. We did the previous episode with the regulators or the Singapore Shipping Association president, Caroline Young and Beng Deep, essentially looking at the regulatory aspects of the maritime ecosystem that is Singapore. Today, in the second episode on Singapore, I have got the privilege and pleasure to invite three commercial uh, users of the maritime Singapore ecosystem. I've got Dennis D. Sepibus from South 32. He's a general manager of raw material, freight, alumina, and all commodities. So obviously South 32, and he will introduce South 32 in a minute. You'll see that it's actually a cargo owner, a producer, and obviously a very important user of the maritime ecosystem. I've got Saunak Rai. He's a general manager of FueLNG. Another very important fuel in the current scenarios of alternate fuels. And obviously, Singapore is hometown for him as well. And he's based there and uses the ecosystem quite proactively. And I've got Captain Subhangshu Dutt, a veteran of the industry, director of OM Maritime. Uh, with Captain Dutt, I think he has worn multiple hats in his stint in Singapore. Over the years, he's actually sailed with erstwhile NOL, which doesn't exist anymore. He has seen Singapore grow from pretty much a no ecosystem to a thriving ecosystem. So his perspectives are going to be very, very crucial. So welcome, gentlemen, to the podcast. And I'm really, really excited because for me, an ecosystem is about the companies and the individuals, and their experiences are very vital in terms of how we can understand the value ecosystem brings. So thank you so much for doing this. Let me just start by asking each one of you, maybe starting with you, Dennis, a little bit about South 32, what you do, what is the company all about, and how do you actually benefit from the maritime Singapore ecosystem? And then Sonak, and then Captain Dutt. Yeah, please.
Right, sure. Thanks, Punit, for the opportunity to join. As South 32, we are based here in Singapore. And when I say based here in Singapore, that's our sales and marketing arm. We're a mining company. We sell our equity products across the world. So all of our sales and marketing are done out of Singapore, the hub, and we have a small office in London as well, and a couple of field agents across the world. But we are very much a customer in terms of freight. We do about 350 to 400 voyage charters a year globally. We ship out of our operations in Australia, South Africa, and South America. And from there, we ship to China, India, Southeast Asia, Middle East. So really Europe as well, and North America, you could call it global. But we do run our shipping arm out of here. So we've got 12 team of 12 people here with covering chartering, operations, safety, sustainability as well. And we do have a small presence in London as well to cover that time zone, as well as into the Americas. But yes, we have chosen to run our shipping from Singapore, and mainly because it is one of those big hubs, and we really find everything that we need right here. I mean, top of the list is probably access to key stakeholders, whether that's owners or customers as well, across into the commodities. We have most counterparts who have an office here. I'd say probably 8 out of the 10 largest owners that we deal with have an office here. And if there isn't an office here, then the visitors come through at least once a quarter. So there's not a week that goes by that we don't have at least someone in the office coming to say hello. So from that point of view, in terms of the connectedness, Singapore is really a great place to be.
Absolutely. I always joke that if you just take a walk down Boat Quay, you can probably meet more people in one beer drinking session, then you can probably meet a people the whole month's trip to London or other places in the world. So Singapore is that way quite central. I agree. Saunak, what about you? And you have actually been involved in other shipping companies, but now you have, and you can elaborate more on that. You have a kind of a role in partly in the regulatory aspects as well, especially with LNG. You're also involved with standards development. So there's a lot of areas where you kind of have touch points with Singapore. Explain a little bit about your interaction and FueLNG's interaction with Singapore.
Thank you, Punit. Firstly, thanks a lot for inviting me to this very eminent discussion
Thank you.
with Dennis and with Subhangshu sir and you yourself. It's quite an honor to be here. FueLNG is a joint venture between Shell and Citrium. So Shell being a large oil and gas company, and Citrium is again a Singapore conglomerate with offices globally worldwide. We are focused on LNG distribution by trucks, trailers, as well as ships. So bringing this new cleaner fuel to shipping. And I'm very happy to say that Singapore last year in 2024 actually broke the record of maximum LNG bunker being bunkered from any port in the world.
Wow.
So that journey has been quite a bit. And it is very fair to say that this achievement could not have happened without something which is very structurally Singaporean. First, I would say is always the geography. Singapore is, when you look at the global trade, it's located in such a good place there. So much of transit traffic. It was when it was a rock, it was formed because of the trade with China, but now it goes straight from all over the Far East Coast to Singapore. So that is one big part. The second big part is the way the maritime ecosystem is structured here in Singapore.
Right.
And it is structured in a manner to make things happen. It is structured in a manner that when you have a problem, it is just not that, hey, you cannot do this. But also, by the way, these are few things or few options you can choose. You cannot do this because of A, B, C, D, but you can do C, D, E.
Right.
And the entire ecosystem from the ministry to the MPA to the various companies, various associations, that is their focus. Their focus is to find a solution for you, which is very important. And then the
Right.
third part, which is especially very important for the new fuels which are coming up in the bunkering environment and the shipping environment, because we're talking now about a new world order with regard to basically GHG emissions from ships.
Yes.
And you know that MEPC 83 agreed on new requirements.
Yes.
And Singapore has been miles ahead. So Singapore has regulations for use of biofuels. For LNG, as you were mentioning, I'm involved in the technical committee for cryogenic fuels, which is LNG, ammonia, hydrogen. And there is a similar fuel for a similar committee for ambient fuels, which look at methanol and which looks at biofuels. And they've already have standards for biofuel, already have standards for LNG. Now they're preparing standards for methanol has been released probably a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
And now we are working on ammonia. So overall, again, as a Singapore, they're not only looking at how we are good today, but what will the whole shipping industry need in the future? And then people like me, people like you, people like Subhangshu sir and Dennis, they involved us in the making of the standards. They involved us. As I was saying, I was chairing this committee. It is composed of entire industry. It's composed of academia. It is composed of suppliers as well as users. The
Yeah.
idea is standard is not something which you take and put it on a shelf on your library, but
Yeah.
actually it's a very usable standard. And I think that
Interesting.
is where Singapore plays a huge role in shipping.
Everybody tells me that basically the size of the country makes a big difference because it's more manageable. But I also believe that in a bigger country, there are smaller size cities or there are smaller size ecosystems which should be kind of following that example, but they don't. So Singapore does have that special aspect where it's a city state in some ways, but it utilizes that quite smartly. Capt, if I come to you, I have known you as a kind of a focus of or a part of Maritime Singapore ecosystem in multiple ways. I've dealt with you as a counterpart. I've dealt with you as a co-committee members in the Institute of Chartership Brokers Singapore branch, and so many other ways. I always find that you try and find what is the best way value can be added to any business. And Singapore seems to be kind of all the time trying to reinvent itself. So maybe you can start by talking a little bit about your own journey a little bit, but most importantly, do you agree with the fact that you are constantly reinventing yourself and Singapore is allowing you to do that at the same time? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Punit. Yes, you aptly described our relationship, and it brings back memories when we did the voyage charter together.
Yes, I remember.
So yes, I've maybe it's also revealing my age, but as I said, I've sailed in NOL, then I worked in a container line, and then I worked with the port, and then when we did the bulk chartering, and then finally moved on to what would have been consultancy teaching mostly, but then other situations developed which made us seize the opportunity into small tanker space. So yes, we've been across, except probably for offshore and LNG, we've done most of the other stuff here. So we are basically a small ship owner. We just operate a total of 5 ships. We have 2 new builds on order. And yeah, by any standards, compared to our peers in Singapore, we are relatively small. Now, while Singapore has this ecosystem and international maritime center structure in place, for ourselves, we don't specifically see any leverage we can draw out of it. Maybe that's for everybody that, look, it's only the pathways laid, you are eventually have to compete with the rest and bring profitability to the table at the end of the day. So that very much is left to us. Talking about ecosystem, now, there was no formal structured ecosystem, but Singapore has all along been a maritime center from the time Sir Stamford Raffles stepped ashore, you know.
Yeah,
it was it was on the international pathway, and to my recollection, yeah, it was a port of call for ships wanting to do repairs and trading. And in fact, as a cadet, I have been here on a ship when the boat quay was actually a boat quay where the warehouses were, and the ships, the barges that house used to load the cargo and come out to anchorage to transfer to our ships.
Now, definitely that's revealing your age, Captain. That
Yeah, it is. It is.
But sure, go ahead.
But yeah, brings back a lot of memories. And back then also, despite the what we will describe as a primitive system, everything worked. You know, we used to come in, and this stuff that came in, there's a house where exports from Malaysia going to the US. So yeah, the whole system worked in back then when there were no computers as well, you know, no email, no computers. They managed to load the ship in anchorage, prepared the bills of lading, made receipts, etc. So I'm saying the talent, the environment has all along been there to support an ecosystem. Of course, with the government coming in, they have formalized, structured it, and yeah, we noticed we were talking about education, and we have in the ICS, and that is where we have seen the benefit of our partnership with MPA, something which may or may not be in the other so-called maritime centers, at least not to that extent as we see it here. They are very approachable, very friendly, and the numbers speak for themselves. The number of students who have availed of the MCF facility and completed the ICS exam, all that. So yes, it definitely is supportive for business. Now, I'll talk a bit about the problems that we face as an SME you know, Singapore talent development has all along been there, but in the maritime field, it's very narrow, and you cannot rely entirely on Singapore as a source of your staff requirement.
Right.
We realized that we wanted, for example, we wanted a specialized accountant who is been familiar in shipping, ship management accounting, and we identified a foreigner, but no go. We couldn't get EP clearance, you know. So
Okay.
this is where perhaps rather than have a blunt hammer, the authorities, MPA or MOM, not MPA, MOM, can maybe drill down and refine the work. But having said that, you know, we have taken advantage of, you know, it's a borderless world. So we now have staff in India, in Philippines, working full time. There is no difference. It's a seamless transfer. I think COVID taught us this, and we are taking full advantage of that. So even though this so-called hurdle exists, we have sort of overcome it. Other than that, yeah, it's what the benefit that we see is being in Singapore adds a lot of value and reputation to your name. So as we go out to transact with new owners, new charterers, that Singapore brand has a value, have an endorsement of reliability, you know, which is conveyed across to the counterparties.
That's interesting. That's a soft power thing. Yeah. That's a
Soft power, yes.
thing. Yeah, absolutely.
That's it.
No, but thank you so much. But maybe Capt, if you can just also elaborate, saying that as you saw this ecosystem develop over a period of time, you saw the fact that Singapore was trying to basically emphasize, and that's something that Bengti and Caroline mentioned in the previous one, saying that they were trying to make it a very deliberate attempt to lure some of the big ones. Dennis, you've been earlier with BHP. BHP was kind of brought in to kind of set up their main business in Asia here. Vale was brought in. Some of the big companies were brought in. Did you actually see a kind of an ecosystem which organically developed like this, or was it something which actually was very deliberately brought about as such? Did you see a lot of your customers, Dennis or Captain Dutt or Saunak, really come in and say, "Oh, I've got people here, so I need to go," rather than somebody inviting you? You are now kind of, business is forcing you to be here or lose out. Is that something which is actually happened? Captain Dutt, you can start, and then Dennis and Saunak can comment on that. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, let me try and break it up in time. From the time because the time you come ashore, you start seeing this. From the time I joined PIL, probably nothing much happened. That's 1988. Nothing much happened for 10 or 15 years. The homegrown companies were there, PIL, PCL. They don't exist, the NOL, and then of course the gentlemen who went belly up, the ocean tankers, Hin Leong. So and then a few smaller Chinese companies. So everybody coexisted and basically fended for themselves in growing. I think somewhere in the early mid 2000s, when EDB and MPA realized the so-called intangible value Singapore has, and then with a slew of tax benefits, etc., one by one started persuading the companies, the names that you just mentioned, to come over. I think some pretty much moved their headquarters here as well. Offhand, I don't know. Trafigura, and their entire trading.
Yep.
I'm a bit unclear. Maybe somebody can help me here. The lot of thing was based on tax incentives. Now, tax incentive is good, but globally it is not. It is not that well appreciated, because between tax incentive and tax evasion, there becomes a fine line. So I think some companies are little sensitive and take cognizance of that point. But yes, we have seen so many companies move in. My personal example, it was so difficult to look for a shore job when I made the move from NOL to PIL. But now there are so many maritime companies looking for captains and chief engineers, etc. So it's a bit different now.
Yeah,
Thanks,
absolutely. And Dennis, again, I would like you to comment on this because
Yeah.
I know from my own personal example that when Clavveness, and I was working in Clavveness at the time, and we set up Clavveness Asia, one of the key aspects of getting Animete to come in and run the combination carriers, for example, was because you guys were here. And the idea was that, can we afford not to be in Singapore because so many of our clients are here? So it was like a business case scenario. It was like a business decision rather than somebody telling you that come and set up in Singapore because we are Singapore. It was like because our customers are there and that's why we have to come there. Did you see a lot of examples of that, or do you still see a lot of examples going on right now, Dennis?
I think Punit, and building on what Captain Dutt said, there was certainly an element looking back, let's say 15, 20 years, where tax was an important driver to bring some people in. But nowadays, it's a combination of, yes, there is still active engagement through Enterprise Singapore, which was EDB at the time. But I think much more importantly, it's now recognizing that critical mass is here. And if you, for example, look at it today with the way, as an Australian company, the way we are taxed, it eventually gets topped off in Australia. So there is no longer a tax incentive to be here, but the real pull factor is being in Singapore because of that critical mass of the counterparts, but also key stakeholders across the industry. And when we talk about building that up, it's maybe what Saunak said before, it is very structured. I like how you mentioned that, Saunak, because it's not just, I think that's been recognized, it's not just the tax incentive, it needs to be all of the projects that MPA is working on. Then you see, for example, the Singapore Chamber of Maritime Arbitration is here just to give that legal sort of framework. Enterprise Singapore is putting on trainings and workshops. The government is really looking at, well, what can we do? What is needed? And if something is lacking in this space, then there's probably a program on the way to make sure that it gets beefed up.
Fill the gaps. Yeah, I agree. And I think that's a very valid point that lifelong learning is something which is a way of life, at least for MPA and others, from what I can see, SSA as well, SCMA too. Saunak, with regard to your two masters, let's put it that way, Shell and Citrium. Obviously, they have presence here, and Citrium is obviously very much also involved here. But in that sense, you had to basically, you could have set yourself up anywhere, right? It was not just need to be Singapore centric. But what is kind of has that impacted really the decision impacted because it was something which was the best ecosystem? But more importantly for me, have you seen other stakeholders and other people that you deal with, whether it is standards, whether it is other bunker related aspects? Do you see that they have all come to Singapore because you're here? Because business makes sense to be very close to your other stakeholders and partners rather than sitting in some other part of the world. So is it business attracting business or government attracting business? That's the question I really wanted to ask. Yeah.
Let me give you a good small story around it. And this is taking you to 2012, 2013. I was not working for FueLNG. I was working for Norwegian gas carriers. And at that time, we had 6 small LNG carriers which could be used for LNG bunkering. Right. And I was heading the global business development, and I was trying to start LNG bunkering all the places in the world. Interestingly, very interesting, in 2013, we did a very similar operation to an LNG bunkering, loading from a FSRU and then bunkering LNGC in Dubai.
Okay.
This is 2013, September 2013. I remember because I was there, and it was a very interesting operation, first in the world. And Middle East all those big LNG location, all origination of LNG is there. One of
Right.
the three major LNG exporting areas. So there is a product which is available, it is cheap, and we have managed to do actually physically show that it can be done. However, LNG bunkering started by trucks, I think in 2018 in Singapore, and by ships in 2021. And it took 2025 for the first LNG bunkering to happen thereafter in the Middle East.
Okay.
It's an interesting thing to note. What happened? Why, although we did our first operation in 2013, why did it took almost 12 years, a little bit more than that, to actually have the next LNG bunkering in Middle East? And it was recently done, there. I think there are a lot of factors. First, of course, is that what Dennis also mentioned, that Singapore approached the problem in a very structured manner. What did they do? They first attracted, because this is talking 2013, 2014, SLNG has just come in. So now suddenly they have a place LNG bunker vessels can load.
Right.
And then they thought, okay, what do you need? I need sellers, I need buyers,
Yes.
and I need a rule of play or a way or process of business how to do that.
Rule book.
Rule book to do that, exactly. So Singapore then went in, and then the approach was very structured. So they first incentivized the buyer by opening up a fund, saying that whoever wants to open an LNG fueled vessel, if they are going to order, we will give you a small $2 million subsidy or something like that. And we will make port fees free, or the harbor fee for everyone who has an LNG fuel vessel coming into Singapore. So then creating demand. Then they launched a tender. They said that, okay, anybody who wants to build an LNG bunker vessel, again, I'll give you $2 million or $3 million, and I'll give you an incentive to do this. And I'm going to open a licensing mechanism. The licensing mechanism will be exclusive for the licenses for the period, so that you're protected from unnecessary competition.
Sure.
So sellers, buyers, sellers. Then they went upon making the standards development of LNG bunkering, making the rule book, making the whole infrastructure ready for this.
Interesting.
And that is why it happened in Singapore much before the Middle East. So it is sometime, although Middle East had all the LNG in the world, they also had a proof of solution that it can be done. It couldn't. It couldn't start before. So that is where I see the role of the administration, or you can say the government in a particular place. That is how they influence.
It's like the jigsaw puzzle pieces are all over the place and nobody's putting them together. That's what it is.
Yes. And you are and to be very sure, they are not doing that themselves. They are just enabling other players to come in and put it together. They are just giving you the frame where you can put it together. So that is the beauty of Singapore.
That's very interesting. That's a great example. Thanks a lot, Saunak. So obviously, the idea behind this is really to try and also look at what is the ecosystem collaboration looking like. So you have got enough examples. Capt, I know you have an office in Dubai. Saunak, you and your stakeholders obviously are global players. Dennis, you just mentioned in South 32, you literally have a global presence all over the place. So when do you actually see the ability, when you look at your own work practices and your own businesses, do you actually imbibe and collaborate and take away some of the best practices from other ecosystems, which Singapore might be kind of lacking or going a little bit slow on, and you think that it can pick up the pace? Do you see ecosystem collaboration happening? Because I know from, you mentioned the SCMA, and obviously I'll try and get the SCMA guys on the next episode. But really, it's about, we actually have to look at what makes LMA tick. It's not just history, it's a lot of other things that come into play. And one of the things that the CMA decided was, let's create simpler rules, which basically made things a bit easier, and they've now seen the cases go up. So what's actually happened is they've learned from the others, imbibed some of those changes, and created best practices. As a business, do all three of you and your companies do see the ability to kind of imbibe that? And what kind of examples can you think of where you have other ecosystems and other locations offering you, saying, we do this better? Or let's say we've got better finance, or we got better talent, or we got better education institutions that you can tap into, or you got better access, like Captain said, of employing somebody with the EP problems not being there. what are the areas where Singapore can learn and improve? Just a short idea from all of you. Maybe Saunak, you're there. You can start with it, and Dennis and Captain Dutt, you can go in the end. Yeah, go ahead, Saunak. Anything that you can comes to mind?
To be very true, very little.
Right.
Again, as I said, my experiences have been different from other companies, but what I've seen is that Singapore has been very agile. There are certain things which they could, but they are because of the nature, the geography, and the location being a very small thing. Because they can't always bring scale. Singapore, one of the biggest problem is that we are unable to bring scale. And
Right.
there was certain time a discussion where a large shipping company wanted to make Singapore as a hub, as a container place, but they did not have that much of space to give it to them. I mean, it's a very interesting story if you look into it, and they had to go to a very close neighbor to make a huge terminal because Singapore could not give the space. Now
Right.
the question was that how did they deal with it? They found a new location where they can create a mega port. They also realized that they don't have the manpower, so they automated it. And you can see how now the new Tuas port is being developed. It's a mega container place.
Sure.
So I think, yeah, in a way, what Singapore couldn't do is because it's restricted by resources, but then how they find a vision and then they invest in a very long-term visions to
Sure.
get over those disabilities or those issues. I think that is what is commendable.
Interesting. Dennis, with regard to one of the things that I've always seen with regard to Singapore, and I remember talking to Philip Clausius from Maritime Capital, and he was like saying that, oh, shipping finance is one thing that Singapore definitely needs to push ahead greater. You know, New York is way ahead of us. London is having its own tradition and history. We need to really start pushing in that direction. And there was some discussion on that. But in transport capital as well and in maritime capital in general. Do you see that there are some pockets where Singapore has the ability to still fill a bit more of the offerings, or you think it's kind of the cup is pretty much full now?
I mean, yeah, similar to what Saunak said, I don't think there's much missing, and what I said earlier, there's probably, if there is something missing, there's probably a program in place to support that and grow it.
Sure.
Is what we're seeing, and maybe perhaps just in terms of the maritime ecosystem, if you look at the ecosystem of Singapore beyond that,
Okay.
I think that is what also, I mean, that's probably the main reason why we are here. We're not here for the shipping. Shipping is one of the services that we consume within Singapore, but we have other producers here. We have customers here. We have traders here. We have the banks here. We have downstream distribution, and we
Right.
also have the shipping. So I think that's where the maritime ecosystem can then tap into, for example, the financial sector, because they are also here. So in terms of things that are lacking, no, and if I think about what we do at South32, we have a strong focus on the next generation and talent development.
Okay.
So if you look at the universities here, there are lectures on commodity markets, and that includes shipping and it includes supply chain. We get pulled in as subject matter experts into that. We have scholars that are in that. We bring them into our office. So again, that's both sides working on it, but that's being developed to make sure the next generation is ready as well.
Absolutely. And that's very, very vital as well because you are literally planting seeds every day. Captain Dutt, you were already talking about some of the areas where Singapore does have some challenges with regard to, let's say, employment permits and stuff like that. But interestingly, you are, of course, a ship owner and you have financed your vessels using, let's say, alternate means of finance and just pure bank finance. Do you think Singapore has got the ability to become a finance hub for shipping as well as other aspects, or is it something which needs to be done? Also, talent development is something very close to your heart. You're involved in it. Do you see any gaps that can be filled by Singapore by learning from others, basically?
Yeah, thanks, Punit. Yes, this is one problem, one nut we are trying to crack every day. Ship financing, I think within Singapore, as Philip Clausius pointed out, the local 4 banks, for them, it's just remaining within the comfort zone. They will readily finance Singapore Airlines, they will readily finance. Okay, NOL no longer exists.
Yeah.
So they are happy to be there. Nothing can go wrong. It's very safe. They can issue a term sheet and get signed. So this is a challenge for SMEs, smaller companies who are very actively in need of capital. As I say, for us, the only thing preventing us from growing is the lack of capital.
Yeah.
We have, for us, we have been at 3 ships for the last 2 years, but we are unable to move ahead. Most of our financing is being done by Chinese lessors who are, much more. You talk to them, they are much more receptive. They much more understand SMEs requirements, and that is why we have made basically got our ships financed, got our new buildings financed. Something which if you ask me, had I approached one of the 4 Singapore big banks, I probably wouldn't have made very much headway. We would be bogged down by the paperwork, by the KYCs. So here, Singapore needs to really scrutinize this issue. Just by financing the NOLs and the Singapore Airlines, you need to grow the other companies as well. And okay, I'll go back a bit. You remember when all the offshore companies ran into deep trouble?
Yes.
The Swiber and sometime this is more than 10 years back. Yeah.
Switzer. Yeah.
It was totally extreme then. I don't know who is the orchestra master controls when, but by that time they used to just throw money at the companies, the local banks. Yeah. And then all of them got burned in the process.
I know that.
And now they have totally gone the other end of the pendulum. So here again, it's you need. There are not many. Unlike the European shipping banks, which are specialist shipping banks, they understand shipping very well. They understand the sub-segments of shipping
and cycles,
the offshore cycles. But they understand the difference between a Handymax and a Panamax, and where does one go. So they are much more tuned to offer practical lending solutions. I think in Singapore, you just have one person assigned to the shipping desk who is doing virtually everything, So,
I think there's a scope for do more there for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Absolutely. But that's really nice. I think we are more or less at time now. But if I actually think about what we've discussed today, I think the structured approach is very valuable. But it also depends on what is happening around the world. Singapore is vulnerable, much more vulnerable to the rest of the world events than any other country, because it really depends on the world trading with each other and continuing to work with each other. The other thing which is very interesting that you mentioned and Dennis, you mentioned as well, is the soft power of Singapore, right? There's a value there of Singapore actually having soft power. And the other thing which I've heard from other people in Singapore is the multiple touch points that Singapore provides. A ship doesn't come into Singapore only for bunkering. At the same time, the ship chandlers can do their work. The agents have got something lined up. Maybe the charterer wants to go and visit the ship. He can actually have people go on there. A lot of these things can actually happen in one place. And the proximity is quite amazing. I mean, I take a walk down the East Coast Park, I can actually see some of those ships and companies which I dealt with and I deal with today as well, having ships right in front of me, not very far from shore. So these are some of the things which I always take away, but there is always scope for improvement. And obviously, I think the current climate remains very, very interesting in terms of opportunities, but also crises and dangers that are there. So all I can say to you guys is thank you very much. Capt, Dutt, Dennis, and Saunak. I think this is about trying to understand where the commercial aspects of a business or an ecosystem is literally creating momentum. And as you rightly said, Dennis, critical mass, which is actually adding value and creating new players on a constant basis. So I leave it at that. And thank you very much for your time. And
thank you for having us.
Thank you, Punit. Yeah, thanks, Dennis and Saunak. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dennis.